West Asia war ending soon or just beginning?
We're very proud to be involved in this, and it's going to be ended soon. And if it starts up again, they'll be hit even harder.
Trump says war complete, but could go further.
We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further, and we're going to go further.
US's Schrodinger's war on Iran. Mixed messaging, soaring stakes. A world scrambling for science. Trump's flip-flops. Top focus on NewsTrack.
Good evening. You're watching NewsTrack with me, Marya Shakil. The United States' war posture against Iran is becoming increasingly difficult to read. US President Donald Trump says the military campaign in Iran could end very soon. But almost immediately he walked that back, warning that the war could just go further easily. Just days ago, Donald Trump had suggested that this operation could last 4 to 5 weeks. Now he says that this war is ahead of schedule. So what exactly is his strategy? Is this calculated ambiguity, perhaps a deliberate attempt to keep Tehran guessing? Or are we watching policy being improvised in real time in the middle of a volatile conflict? Because every signal from Washington is now moving global markets. When Donald Trump hinted that the war could end soon, easing fears of disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices immediately dropped. But that relief proved fleeting. Even as he talks about winding down the war, Donald Trump is raising the stakes, warning that the United States would strike Iran even harder if Tehran interferes with oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. So is there a method to Trump's mixed messaging? Or is Washington still searching for a clear exit strategy? That's the big question on the show tonight. We'll try and decode Trump's shifting signals and what they could mean for the trajectory of this war. And then we'll be joined by a very special guest. Oil markets are jittery, and the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil flows, has once again become the world's most critical geopolitical choke point. For years, economists warned that the biggest threat to the global economy would not come from markets, but from geopolitics. And that warning now appears to be playing out in real time. Joining me now, straight from London, is Martin Wolf, chief economics commentator at the Financial Times, one of the world's most influential voices on how geopolitics and economics collide. Mr. Wolf, let me begin with what's happening in Washington. Donald Trump has governed largely through unpredictability. With this Iran escalation, is the United States now injecting a level of uncertainty into the global economy that markets simply cannot price in?
Yes, I think the answer to that is very simple. It's yes. I mean, nobody knows, as your introductory story showed, what's going to happen next. Because nobody knows what their aims for the war are. And the statements that we've got from the administration are constantly changing, radically changing. So nobody knows how long this operation will continue, what might cause it to end. And as has already been noted, this has already stopped tanker trade through the Straits of Hormuz, which is the most important choke point on anything in the world. And as long as that continues, the supply of oil and gas to the world economy will be drastically reduced, and the result will be higher prices, higher inflation, tighter monetary policy, turmoil in stock markets, if it's all seen as something that will go on for a long time. But maybe we'll stop next week because Donald Trump will just say it's over. And if America stops fighting, well, effectively it is over in a sense. The Iranians have already said they will then stop attacking the straits and it will be over. So who knows what he's going to do?
Martin Wolf, is the global economy resilient enough to absorb that shock, the oil shock?
I think there are sort of several answers to that. The first answer is that it depends on how long it goes on. So I've just done a column on this, which I report some research here in London, which analyzes the consequences of very little, something that's over in a couple of weeks, all the way to something that continues for 4 months, with, in addition, significant damage to the oil supply. And if it's the latter case, they argue we could have oil prices at $150 a barrel for an extended period. We would have a 8 to 9% reduction in exports of world oil and gas, and this would have significant effects on the world economy. You mustn't exaggerate it. It wouldn't be as bad as in the 70s and early 80s, but it will be a very significant oil shock, probably reducing world GDP growth by 0.5% of GDP, half a percentage point of GDP. Of course, if it goes on for a year, which does seem unlikely, it will be much worse. So the key question is, we don't know how long this will last. And we also haven't been tested at a world level with this sort of shock for a very long time. We tend to think the oil economy is less important. Oil is less important to the world economy than it used to be because there are renewables and because we've reduced the energy intensity, oil intensity of our economy particularly greatly, and that will be helpful. But we may be being too optimistic. But my conclusion is, if it's if it's all over in a couple of weeks, it'll be nothing. If it goes on for 4 months, we would notice it, but it probably wouldn't be a catastrophe.
So you're looking at a catastrophe only when it will go on for a year. If the Straits of Hormuz are closed for a year, it will be a very big economic shock. I'd say we would find some ways around it, but it's so central that, and particularly if the oil, if you got really big damage to the oil fields, the Gulf region contains almost half of the world's reserves, though the production is much lower, then that will be very significant for the world economy. So are we looking at the shock being felt all over the world? Because much of the Gulf's oil ultimately powers Asian economies, from Iran to China. If this war drags on, will the real economic pain then be felt not in the West, but across the developing world?
It will be felt across the world in the sense that the price rises will be for everybody. This is less true for gas. The markets are less integrated because transport across continental boundaries is more difficult. With oil, it's an internationally traded commodity, so the price rise will be the same essentially everywhere. But the impact on economies still varies very substantially depending on whether countries are large net oil importers or net oil exporters. If you're a net oil exporter like the United States, this is not a shock to the terms of trade, if you like. Your national income is not reduced, though the price of oil goes up, the value of your exports of oil go up. So to simplify it a bit, the net effect is mildly positive. Then it's a distributional question within your economy, which you can deal with. But if you are a very large net importer of oil, Europe is, India is, China is, then you are going to be worse off. And it will affect your economy, not inconsiderably. And if there are second round effects, because monetary policy is tightened to control inflation expectations, and if stock markets and other markets are adversely affected, demand in the world economy will be reduced, and you could possibly have a combination of effects which would not be, I think, catastrophic. We're not talking about something like the financial crisis, but it would be a significant negative for the world economy. And these second round effects are complex and, of course, themselves very difficult to predict.
Okay, help us understand. You have spoken about the crude oil and the impact on the entire oil economy. What about gas?
Gas is it seems to be very different, but the countries that import LNG, liquid natural gas from the Gulf, will all be affected. And that is, as far as I can see, mostly Asia. Europe also imports a lot, but we actually import a lot from the US too. And we have reduced fairly significantly our dependence on Russia. So I think the impact on Europe will be smaller, but the large net oil importers of LNG from the Gulf seem to be Asian, and they will be the most hit. In America, which is a net exporter, but nearly all its production of liquid gas is domestic, the price of gas seems to be extraordinarily independent of world prices because it's self-sufficient and it isn't a freely traded commodity, an easily traded commodity worldwide. So in the gas case, there are definitely regional differences in how important it is, and it depends on the specific economy and how much of the liquid natural gas they use comes from the Gulf.
So are you seeing that shock particularly with to do with gas, the LPG, more on developing economies and developing world?
That I'm not sure of, because I haven't looked at, and I have to admit this, sort of the detailed pattern of who is the largest importer of liquid natural gas from the Middle East. But I would expect it to be particularly Asian economies, possibly some African ones, but particularly Asian economies that use liquid natural gas as an important feedstock and supplier of energy. And you'd have to look at this country by country.
Okay, I'm going to quote you here. You have written that geopolitics has returned with a vengeance to the global economy. Does the Iran conflict then confirm that wars are now shaping the global economy more than economic logic itself?
Well, I think not more. I mean, economic logic remains incredibly powerful. You can see that if you look at patterns of world trade, who exports, what they export, what they import. That remains dominant determinant of what one makes. But the shocks from geopolitics have always been very important. Let's be clear, they're just unpredictable. I mean, the 70s was an age of geopolitics big time. The first oil shock was fundamentally geopolitics. It was a response to the Yom Kippur War. So there's nothing new about this. World wars, of course, have always been devastating economic events. What I would say is from time to time, these things happen. But in an era when there are huge shifts in relative power in the world, and where there are a lot of stresses among great powers, it's not surprising to see more pressure from geopolitics than we thought was reasonable 25 years ago in the late 90s or so. And that is what we're seeing. We are seeing a lot of tension. So one of the reasons, though they haven't said this, that Americans might have thought of doing this is that if anyone's going to suffer, we won't, because we're energy self-sufficient, but China will suffer because China is a huge net importer. An event like this, which has the bonus of doing something about Persia, Iran, and Iran's threat to the Gulf as they see it, and a threat to Israel as they see it, might have the additional benefits that it puts China in its place. Now, they haven't said that, but if they look at the trade and production figures for oil and gas, particularly oil, that they could reasonably reach this conclusion. So it's part of the war. On the other hand, it strengthens Russia. It makes Russian oil more valuable. Is that an aim of the Trump administration? Well, it could be, looking at Trump's behavior with Mr. Putin. Yeah, not completely implausible. But I wouldn't say this is powerfully driven by a great global grand strategy, a geopolitical grand strategy. I don't think Donald Trump has a geopolitical grand strategy, but you can see some elements of it in it.
So you are calling this a strategy to punish China and strengthening Russia?
No, I'm saying that will be one interpretation of what's happened. If you were trying to work out what is the geopolitical rationale of this war, and rather than, apart from the obvious one, namely they want to stop Iran's nuclear program and they want to get rid of the mullahs from the get rid of the regime. If you want to go beyond that, then you could argue that the United States doesn't mind doing this because every other major power is weakened more than the US by it. That's understandable geopolitical argument, and it might be a factor in their considerations.
Okay, so does this Iran conflict accelerate the shift towards a world of competing economic blocs and weaponized supply chains?
Well, I would say that it underlines the unpredictability of the world system. And inevitably, that means those countries that are vulnerable in some respects, and vulnerabilities differ across major powers, will try to address them. So I don't know if we call it weaponized, but for example, if you're the government of India or China or Europe, you might say to yourself, well, oil is a very problematic commodity. We're a huge net importer. We need to accelerate our investment in renewables. They can't take the sun away from us. They can't take the wind away from us. So we should invest for strategic reasons in renewables, to take that example. And that, I think, is a natural and logical consequence. Indeed, I argue that in my book. Now, for the Americans, there are still reasons to go for renewables, though Donald Trump doesn't accept them. But this one doesn't apply because the shale gas and oil revolution, which is such an extraordinary development, has moved the United States into being a net exporter again. So for the strategic reasons don't apply, which they very clearly apply in the cases of, I just mentioned, Europe, China, and India.
Okay, that brings me to my last question, Martin Wolf. Did Washington underestimate the economic consequences of confronting Iran militarily?
I find it very difficult to believe, in the sense that even I, in no way a strategic expert, could look at the map and look at what Iran has done and does. Its supply of drones, for example, in the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's on the wrong side, in my view, of course, but that's neither here nor there. Looking at Iran's location right on the Gulf, as it were, it was obvious to me, as a complete nincompoop in these affairs, in military matters, that the first thing Iran would do if it attacked was to attack all these countries, attack the refineries, and try and stop and tell the tankers that they couldn't move, because if they did, they will be hit. And nobody wants their tankers to be hit. So, of course, what they've done was completely and utterly predictable and predicted. I cannot imagine that there weren't people in the administration, and certainly in the Pentagon, who didn't point this out. Are they surprised by the effectiveness of this? Well, they shouldn't have been. Anybody who knows anything about these conflicts in the Gulf region know how effective this could be, and the global effects if it continues in months. And they must have had the possibility that they would have to go on for months, because this regime isn't just going to collapse and disappear. It's a deeply entrenched regime of pretty fanatical people. So if they are surprised, and all I can say, it's astonishing to me that they're surprised. I mean, the other possibility, which I hesitate to put forward, but seems to me consistent with the evidence, is that the people making the decision in the end are pretty stupid.
All right, Martin Wolf, pleasure speaking to you, sir. You are one of the world's most influential voices on trade and geopolitics. Thank you for your time here on India Today.
It was a pleasure.